She stood on the marriage platform for the seventh time, watching wagon after wagon pass her by like she was invisible. 7 rejections, 7 humiliations. The Chinese woman nobody wanted in a town that made damn sure she knew it. They whispered that she was too foreign, too old, too different. And maybe they were right. Maybe she'd never belong anywhere. But what they didn't know was that rejection number 7 would be the one that changed everything. So stick with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The wooden platform beneath Mei Lan Zhao's feet had absorbed the dirt and desperation of 100 hopeful women before her. And now it was soaking up hers too. She stood third in line, hands folded in front of her faded blue dress, the nice one, the one she'd saved for occasions that mattered, the one that was supposed to make her look like she belonged. It didn't. Red Hollow, Montana Territory, 1882. Population, 432 souls, not counting the Chinese, which they usually didn't. The town square smelled like horse manure and fresh lumber, and the September sun beat down on the marriage selection like it had nothing better to do than watch another group of lonely men choose wives from a lineup of even lonelier women. Maylene had been through this 6 times before. 6 different towns, 6 different platforms, 6 different versions of the same humiliation. But she'd paid her last $20 to get to Red Hollow, which meant this was it. 7th time's the charm, people said, though they probably weren't talking about mail-order brides who'd been rejected more times than a bad check. The woman to her left, Martha, a blonde widow from Ohio, was already smiling at the approaching ranchers. The woman to her right, some young thing whose name Maylene hadn't caught, kept adjusting her bodice like that would make a difference. Maylene just stood there, chin up, eyes forward, trying to look like she had somewhere else to be if this didn't work out. She didn't. The first rancher was a thick-necked man who smelled like whiskey and walked like he owned the ground beneath his boots. He looked at Martha, looked at the young thing. His eyes slid right past Maylene like she was part of the scenery. He picked Martha without saying a word, just jerked his thumb toward his wagon. Martha practically ran off the platform, relief flooding her face. 4 women left, 15 ranchers waiting. The second rancher was younger, nervous, kept wringing his hat in his hands. He stammered something to the young thing about having a nice cabin and good land. She said yes before he finished talking. Another wagon rolled away. 3 women left. "This is humiliating," the woman next to Maylene whispered. Her name was Catherine, and she had the kind of face that might have been pretty before life got hold of it. "Standing here like cattle. Cattle sell faster," Maylene said. Catherine laughed, sharp and bitter. "At least you've got humor about it. How many times you done this? Enough to know how it ends." "Jesus, really? Why do you keep—" Catherine stopped herself, eyes dropping to Maylene's face, her hands, the black hair pinned tight against her skull. "Oh, I see." "Everyone does," Maylene said. The third rancher picked Catherine. The fourth picked the last woman, a rail-thin brunette who'd been crying quietly into her handkerchief. And then there was just Maylene, alone on the platform, with 11 ranchers left to go. This was the part she hated most. Not the rejection itself, she'd made peace with that somewhere around town number 3. What gutted her was the hope. That stupid, stubborn hope that crawled up her throat every single time a new man walked forward. Maybe this one would be different. Maybe this one would see past the fact that her eyes didn't look like his mother's, that her accent wasn't quite right, that her skin told a story his neighbors wouldn't want to hear. The 5th rancher took one look at her and turned around. Didn't even pretend to consider it. The 6th walked right past her to the platform organizer, a pinched-faced man named Horace who'd been running these selections for 5 years. "That all you got?" The rancher asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "There's one more." "I got eyes. I'm asking if there's anyone else." Horace glanced at Maylene, then back at the rancher. "Just her. Then I'll come back next month." He left, just like that. By the 9th rancher, the crowd had started whispering. Maylene could hear every word because they weren't really trying to whisper. They wanted her to hear. "Shame, really. Pretty enough if you don't look too close." "Can't blame them. Man wants a wife who looks like family." "What's she even doing here? They got their own kind in San Francisco." Someone should tell her, save everyone the trouble. The 11th rancher was the worst because he almost chose her. He walked up, looked her over with eyes that weren't cruel, just calculating. Maylene could see him doing the math. She was here, she was available. She was clearly desperate. But then his gaze flicked to the crowd, to the other ranchers, to the town council members watching from the saloon porch. She could see the moment he decided his reputation was worth more than a wife. "Sorry, miss," he said, quiet enough that only she could hear. "Nothing personal." "Of course not," Maylene said, and meant it. It was never personal. That would have required them to see her as a person. When the last wagon rolled away, Horace climbed onto the platform with a practiced expression of sympathy that didn't touch his eyes. The crowd was dispersing, women clustering together to gossip, men heading back to the saloon. The marriage selection was over. Red Hollow had found its brides. All except one. "Miss Zhao," Horace said, "I'm terribly sorry. Perhaps next month." "There won't be a next month." Maylene stepped down from the platform, her legs stiff from standing so long. "I'm done." "Oh, now, don't say that. You're a handsome woman, and I'm sure—" "I said I'm done." She walked away before he could offer her more empty comfort. Her room at the boarding house cost 50 cents a night, and she had exactly $1.30 left to her name. Enough for 2 more nights, maybe 3 if she skipped meals. The stagecoach to anywhere else cost $3 minimum. She'd really thought it would be different this time. The boarding house sat at the edge of town, a sagging 2-story building that smelled like boiled cabbage and decades of other people's disappointment. Maylene's room was on the 2nd floor, barely big enough for a bed and a washstand. She sat on the thin mattress and stared at the wall, trying to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do next. She could write to her cousin in San Francisco, beg for money to come home, admit that she'd failed, that she'd spent every cent chasing a dream that was never meant for her. Go back to the laundry, to 14-hour days and hands rubbed raw, to the same 4 blocks of Chinatown she'd been trying to escape for 3 years. Or she could stay here, find work. Red Hollow had a restaurant, didn't it? Someone's kitchen that needed help? She could cook, clean, anything. Except nobody would hire her. Because if they wouldn't choose her as a wife, even when desperate, why would they trust her to touch their food? A knock on the door interrupted her spiral. "Miss Zhao?" It was Mrs. Chen, the boarding house owner. Another Chinese immigrant, but one who'd been here long enough to speak English without an accent and look at newcomers like Maylene with a mixture of pity and impatience. "You have a visitor." Maylene's stomach dropped. Horace, probably, coming to tell her she needed to leave town. Or maybe the town council, wanting to make sure the rejected bride didn't stick around and embarrass everyone. But when she opened the door, Mrs. Chen's face was strange. Not hostile, but confused, maybe even nervous. "Who is it?" "Gideon Vance." The name meant nothing to Maylene. "I don't know." "Everyone knows Gideon Vance." Mrs. Chen's voice had gone quiet, the way people's voices went when they talked about money or power, or things too big to argue with. "He owns Iron Ridge Ranch, biggest spread in 3 counties. He's downstairs, asking for you." Maylene's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Maybe she'd done something wrong, stood on the wrong platform, signed the wrong paper. Maybe this Gideon Vance was here to tell her personally that she needed to leave. "Tell him I'll be down in a moment." She didn't bother changing. The dress was still her nice one, even if it hadn't worked. She pinned back a strand of hair that had come loose, splashed water on her face, and went downstairs with her spine straight and her expectations at rock bottom. The man in the boarding house parlor didn't look like what Maylene had imagined. He was tall, yes, with the kind of broad shoulders that came from real work, not just ordering other people around. But his clothes were dusty from travel, his hat was old, and his face had the kind of lines that meant he smiled more than he frowned. He looked like he was in his mid-40s and tired, but not mean. He stood when she entered. "Miss Zhao, thank you for seeing me." "I'm not sure I had a choice, but..." She stayed near the doorway. "Mrs. Chen said you asked for me specifically." "I did." He gestured to the worn settee. "Will you sit? This might take a few minutes." "I'd rather stand." She crossed her arms. "No offense, Mr. Vance, but I've had a long day and I'd prefer you just tell me what this is about." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or appreciation. Fair enough. I heard about the marriage selection today. Heard it didn't go well for you. Heat crawled up Maylene's neck. News travels fast. Red Hollow's a small town. Gets smaller when people have something interesting to talk about. He paused. I also heard this was your 7th time. Are you here to make sure I'm counting correctly? No, ma'am. I'm here because I missed the selection. He turned his hat in his hands, the same way that nervous young rancher had. Got delayed 2 counties over. Cattle business. By the time I arrived, everyone had already left. Horace told me about you. I'm sure he had lots to say. He said you'd been passed over 7 times and that you were giving up. Gideon's voice was careful, like he was picking his way across ice. He also said you kept your chin up through the whole thing. Didn't cry, didn't beg, just stood there like you had every right to be chosen. I did have every right. I know, but the 2 words hit Maylene harder than she expected. She uncrossed her arms, suddenly unsteady. Why are you here, Mr. Vance? I need a wife. He said it plainly, not like a business transaction, but not like a romance either. Just a fact. My ranch is struggling. I need someone smart enough to help me run it, strong enough to handle the work, and stubborn enough not to quit when things get hard. Horace said you might fit that description. Horace doesn't know me. No, but he's seen you stand on that platform 7 times. That tells me everything I need to know about stubborn. Maylene stared at him, waiting for the catch, the condition, the moment where he explained that actually there was a problem, a small issue, a thing he needed to mention first. It didn't come. You don't even know me, she finally said. You don't know me either, but I'm not asking you to marry me tonight. He met her eyes dead on. I'm asking if you'll come out to Iron Ridge for a week. See the place. See me. See if you can stand the idea of building something there. And if at the end of the week you want to leave, I'll pay for your stagecoach ticket anywhere you want to go. No strings. Why would you do that? Because I'm desperate and you're desperate, and sometimes that's the best foundation for honesty. He put his hat back on. I'm not a romantic, Miss Zhao. I won't promise you passion or poetry, but I can promise you a partnership. Someone who will respect what you bring to the table and won't waste your time pretending you're something you're not. And what am I? Tough as nails and twice as useful. He said it like a compliment. That's not a weakness where I come from. That's currency. Maylene's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her sides so he wouldn't see. When would we leave? Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock. I've got a wagon outside. He pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket and set it on the side table. There's $5 in there, for tonight's room and meals. Whatever you don't use, keep it. Like I said, no strings. He walked to the door, then paused. Miss Zhao, I heard what those men said today, about you not looking like family. His jaw tightened. The men who work my ranch come from 6 different countries. We speak 4 languages at the dinner table on a good night. You won't look out of place there. I can promise you that much. He left before she could respond. Maylene stood in the empty parlor, staring at the leather pouch like it might disappear if she looked away. $5. More than she'd had an hour ago, more than she'd had in weeks. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway. Did he really ask you to come to Iron Ridge? He did. And you said? I didn't say anything. Maylene picked up the pouch. It was heavier than she expected. Do you know him? Is he honest? Mrs. Chen's expression softened. Gideon Vance is one of the few men in this territory who pays fair wages and doesn't care where you came from. He's not warm, and he works his people hard, but he's decent. That's rare enough to matter. So I should go. I didn't say that. Mrs. Chen sighed. But I will say this. You've been rejected 7 times by men who couldn't see past their own ignorance. Maybe it's time to take a chance on someone who actually looked at you and saw something worth fighting for. That night, Maylene didn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to remember when she'd stopped believing that things could change. Was it the 3rd rejection, the 5th? Or had she known all along from the moment she'd left San Francisco that this was a fool's errand? She thought about her mother, who died when Maylene was 12, who'd worked herself to death in the laundries and never complained, never asked for more, just accepted that this was her lot. Maylene had promised herself she'd be different, that she'd find a way to build something bigger than four walls and someone else's dirty clothes. 7 rejections later, she'd ended up in the same place. Broke, alone, invisible. Except maybe not invisible. Not to Gideon Vance. She tried to picture him, really picture him. Not the desperation that had brought him to her door, but the man himself. His hands had calluses, his boots were worn at the heels. He spoke like someone who'd learned to measure his words carefully to mean what he said. And when he'd looked at her, he hadn't looked through her. That alone felt like a miracle. At 6:30 the next morning, Maylene packed her single bag, 2 dresses, 1 pair of shoes, her mother's jade bracelet, and a battered copy of David Copperfield she'd read so many times the pages were soft as cloth. Everything she owned fit into a canvas bag small enough to carry one-handed. Gideon Vance was already outside with his wagon. He nodded when he saw her, no surprise in his eyes, like he'd known she'd come. "Morning, Miss Zhao." "Morning." She climbed into the wagon seat beside him, her bag clutched in her lap. "I have conditions." His eyebrows rose. "All right. I want honesty. About everything. If your ranch is failing, I want to know why. If the men who work there are going to make my life hell, I want to know that too. And I want to say in how things run, not just cooking and cleaning, actual decisions. Done." "I'm serious, Mr. Vance. I'm not interested in being decorative or quiet or good, because I need someone who knows how to work, not someone who knows how to look pretty at church." He picked up the reins. "Anything else?" Maylene thought about it. "At the end of the week, if I decide this won't work, you'll take me to the stagecoach without argument. No guilt, no pressure." "Agreed." He glanced at her. "And if you decide it will work, then we'll figure out the details, together." "Fair enough." He clicked his tongue and the horses started moving. Red Hollow fell away behind them, the platform where she'd stood 7 times, getting smaller and smaller until it was just another piece of scenery. The ride to Iron Ridge took 4 hours. Gideon wasn't much of a talker, which Maylene appreciated. She was talked out, smiled out, performed out. She just sat and watched the landscape change from scrubby grassland to rolling hills to something bigger, wilder. The kind of country that didn't care if you belonged or not. It just was. "Tell me about the ranch," she finally said. "It's big. 15,000 acres. We run cattle mostly, some horses. Got 30 men working the operation, give or take. Foreman named Dutch. He's been with me since the beginning. Good man, even if he's suspicious of strangers." "Suspicious of me, you mean?" "Suspicious of everyone. But, yeah, you especially. Fair warning, not everyone's going to be thrilled about you showing up. I'm used to it." "Maybe, but that doesn't make it right." He was quiet for a moment. "I won't lie to you, Miss Zhao. The ranch is hemorrhaging money. We're getting undercut on contracts. Supplies cost twice what they should, and someone's been stealing from us. Not much, but enough to notice. I've been trying to plug the holes, but I'm one man and I don't know half as much about bookkeeping as I should. You need an accountant. I need someone who can see what I'm missing. I'm good with cattle, good with land. But numbers? That's a different language." Maylene felt something shift in her chest. Not quite hope. She'd learned better than that. But something close to possibility. "I'm good with numbers." "I know. Mrs. Chen told me." "What else did Mrs. Chen tell you?" "That you used to run the books for a laundry business in San Francisco. That you're sharper than most of the educated men she's met. And that you're here because you wanted something more than what that city would give you." He looked at her. "That about right?" "Close enough." They crested a hill and Iron Ridge spread out below them. The ranch wasn't beautiful, not in the way paintings made ranches look, with pristine fences and manicured fields. It was raw and functional, a sprawling collection of buildings that had grown up organically over decades. The main house was 2 stories of weathered wood and stone. The bunkhouse was long and low. The barns looked sturdy but tired. Everything needed paint, or repair, or both. But it was big. Bigger than anything Maylene had ever imagined belonging to. "Home sweet home," Gideon said. and there was something in his voice that might have been affection or might have been exhaustion. "What do you think?" "I think it looks like work." "That's the right answer." As they approached, men started emerging from the buildings. Cowboys, ranch hands, all of them stopping to stare at the wagon, at her. Maylene felt their eyes like weight, like judgment. She'd walked into rooms full of hostile strangers before, but this was different. This was supposed to be home. A tall man with graying hair and a face like carved granite stepped forward. He had to be Dutch, the foreman. He looked at Gideon, then at Maylene, and his expression didn't change at all. "Boss?" "Dutch, this is Miss Zhao. She'll be staying with us for a week." "A week?" Dutch's tone was flat, not hostile, but not welcoming either. Just nothing. "That's right. I want everyone to treat her with respect. She's here as my guest." One of the younger cowboys muttered something Maylene couldn't quite hear. Whatever it was made another man laugh. Gideon's jaw tightened. "You got something to say, Travis?" The young cowboy had the decency to look embarrassed. "No, sir." "Good, because the next man who makes Miss Zhao feel unwelcome is going to find himself riding fence line for a month straight. We clear?" Silence, then a few scattered nods. Maylene climbed down from the wagon before Gideon could help her. She looked at the assembled men, 30 of them, just like he'd said, all different ages and sizes and backgrounds, all of them staring at her like she was a problem they'd have to solve. "I don't need welcome," she said. Her voice carried across the yard. "I need work. If you've got it, I'll do it. If you don't, stay out of my way." Dutch's expression shifted. Not quite approval, but something like acknowledgement. "That's the other thing you should know about Miss Zhao," Gideon said. "She doesn't waste time on bullshit. So if you plan to treat her like decoration, you're going to have a bad week." He picked up her bag and gestured toward the main house. "Come on, I'll show you your room." The house was bigger inside than it looked, but emptier too. There was furniture, good furniture, the kind that lasted generations, but no life to it. No pictures on the walls, no curtains on the windows, just spaces that people move through without actually living in them. "My wife decorated this place," Gideon said quietly. "She died 6 years ago. Haven't had the heart to change much." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. She would have liked you." He opened a door on the second floor. This was going to be our daughter's room. Never got that far. The room was simple. A bed, a dresser, a window overlooking the eastern pastures. Clean but impersonal, waiting for someone to make it theirs. "It's nice," Maylene said, and meant it. "I'll let you settle in. Dinner's at 6. We eat in the main dining room. Me, Dutch, a few of the senior hands. You're welcome to join us." He hesitated. "Or I can bring something to your room if you'd rather." "I'll eat with everyone else." "You sure? They're not going to make it easy." Maylene set her bag on the bed. "Mr. Vance, I've spent the last 3 years making things easy for other people, smiling when I didn't want to, staying quiet when I had things to say, trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. I'm done with easy." For the first time since they'd met, Gideon smiled. Really smiled. "Yeah, I think you'll do just fine here." Dinner was exactly as uncomfortable as Maylene had expected, which somehow made it worse. At least if it had been a surprise, she could have pretended to be caught off guard. Instead, she walked into that dining room with her eyes wide open, knowing every man at the table wished she was somewhere else. The room itself was bigger than it needed to be, with a long oak table that could have seated 20 but only held 8. Gideon sat at the head. Dutch took the spot to his right, like it was assigned by law. The other men, she caught names like Cole, Marcus, and someone they called Preacher, even though he cursed more than anyone, filled in the rest. They'd left a chair open next to Gideon, clearly meant for her. She took the seat at the opposite end instead. Dutch's eyebrows went up. Cole coughed into his hand. Gideon just looked at her with something that might have been amusement. "That seat's further from the food," he said. "I've got arms. I can reach." The food came out in waves: roast beef, potatoes, beans, bread that was dense and still warm. A woman named Sarah brought it all, and she was the first person who'd smiled at Maylene since she'd arrived. Not a big smile, just a flicker of acknowledgement that said at least one other woman understood what it was like to be outnumbered. For the first few minutes, nobody talked, just the sound of forks on plates and men chewing. Maylene ate slowly, studying each of them the way she used to study the books back in San Francisco. Dutch was the easiest to read. He didn't trust her, but he didn't trust anyone, so at least it wasn't personal. Cole was younger, maybe 30, and he kept sneaking glances at her when he thought she wasn't looking. Marcus was older, weathered, the kind of man who'd seen everything and wasn't impressed by much of it. Preacher had scars on his knuckles and a face that suggested he'd earned every one of them the hard way. "So," Cole finally said, and everyone tensed like he'd just pulled a gun. "You really stood on 7 platforms?" "Cole," Dutch's voice carried a warning. "What? I'm just asking." Maylene set down her fork. "Yes, 7 platforms, 7 towns, 7 times watching men decide I wasn't worth their trouble." "That's rough." Cole actually sounded sympathetic. "Why'd you keep trying?" "Same reason you keep working cattle, even when they kick you. Sometimes stubborn is all you've got." Marcus snorted, but it wasn't mean. More like recognition. "Where are you from originally?" Preacher asked. His accent was thick. Southern, maybe Georgia. "You sound like you've been speaking English a while." "San Francisco, born there. My parents came over in '52. "Gold rush," Marcus said. "Railroad, actually. My father died building track in the mountains. My mother worked in the laundries until she couldn't anymore." Maylene picked up her fork again. "I took over the bookkeeping when I was 14. Ran the numbers for 3 different businesses before I decided there had to be something better than counting other people's money." "So you came out here to find a husband." Dutch's tone was neutral, but the implication wasn't. "I came out here to find a life. Husband was just the easiest path to land and stability." She met his eyes. "Turns out it wasn't as easy as I thought." "You know anything about ranching?" This from Cole. "Not a thing. But I know about inventory management, supply chain efficiency, and how to spot when someone's padding their invoices. I'm guessing at least one of those might be useful." The table went quiet again. Different quiet this time. Gideon was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Dutch looked like he was recalculating something. "Boss mentioned you might take a look at the books," Dutch said slowly. "That's still happening?" "If he'll let me." Maylene looked at Gideon. "You said the ranch was bleeding money. I'd like to see where it's going. Tomorrow morning work for you?" "Tonight works better." Gideon almost smiled. "You don't waste time. You're paying for a week of my time. Seems wasteful to spend it sleeping." Preacher laughed at that, sharp and sudden. "She's got a point, boss." After dinner, Gideon led her to what he called his office, but what really looked like a storage room someone had shoved a desk into. Papers were stacked everywhere, on the desk, on chairs, and boxes on the floor. Ledgers from different years mixed together like someone had given up trying to organize them. "It's a mess," Gideon said. He had the decency to look embarrassed. "My wife used to handle this part. After she died, I tried to keep up with it, but you're a rancher, not a bookkeeper." Maylene picked up the nearest ledger, flipped it open. The handwriting changed 3 times on the first page alone. Numbers were scratched out, rewritten. Some of them didn't even add up right. "How long has it been like this?" 4 years. Maybe 5. "And you've been running the ranch blind this whole time." "Not blind. I know what's in the pastures, what's in the barns. I know every head of cattle and every horse by name. But you don't know if you're making money or losing it." Gideon's silence was answer enough. Maylene pulled up a chair and started sorting. The first hour was just triage, separating ledgers by year, finding invoices, matching payments to purchases. The numbers told a story if you knew how to listen, and Maylene had been listening to numbers her whole life. Gideon watched for a while, then started helping. He didn't know the system, but he could follow instructions. Sort these by date, stack those by vendor, pull out anything that looks like a contract. "You don't have to stay," Maylene said around midnight. "I can do this myself." "It's my ranch. I should know what you're finding." "You won't like it." "I already don't like it. That's why you're here." By 2 in the morning, Maylene had enough pieces to see the shape of the problem. She sat back, rubbed her eyes, and tried to figure out how to explain it without sounding like she was accusing him of being an idiot. "Your feed supplier is robbing you," she said. Gideon looked up from the stack of receipts he'd been organizing. "What?" "Carson Feed and Grain. You've been buying from them for 6 years. The first 2 years prices were reasonable. After that, they started creeping up. Not enough to notice month to month, but over time." She showed him 2 invoices from different years. "You're paying 30% more than you should be, maybe more. They're the only supplier in the area. They're the only supplier you're using. That's different." Maylene pulled out another ledger. "Your contracts with the cattle buyers are worse. You're getting undercut on price, and there's a penalty clause in here that doesn't make sense. See this? You pay them a fee if you don't deliver on time, but there's no compensation if they're late picking up. That's just how the contracts work. That's how their contracts work because you let them write the terms." She wasn't trying to be harsh, but the truth didn't have a gentle setting. "You're getting squeezed from both sides. Your costs are too high, and your revenue is too low. Even if you run this place perfectly, you'll still lose money." Gideon stood up, walked to the window. Outside, the ranch was dark except for a light in the bunkhouse. "I knew it was bad. I didn't realize it was that bad." "It gets worse." "Of course it does." Maylene hesitated. This was the part that would either convince him she was worth keeping around or make him regret bringing her here. Someone's stealing from you, not supplies. Those discrepancies are too small and too random. But money. I think whoever keeps these books has been skimming. "That's not possible. I keep the books." "You start them, but look." She showed him a page from 3 months ago. "This entry here for fence repairs. The handwriting's different from yours. Whoever wrote this added an extra 0. Instead of $40, you paid $400. Same thing here and here. Always small enough that you wouldn't notice if you were just glancing through." Gideon's face had gone hard. "Who has access to these ledgers?" "According to the logs, you, Dutch, and someone named Raymond, who I haven't met yet. Raymond's the assistant foreman, handles supply runs." Gideon's jaw tightened. "He's been with me for 3 years. I trusted him." "Trust doesn't balance books." Maylene closed the ledger. "But before you fire him, you need proof. Real proof. Because if I'm wrong, you'll lose a good worker. And if I'm right but you can't prove it, he'll just be more careful." "What do you suggest?" "Let me keep looking. Give me access to everything. Invoices, receipts, bank records if you have them. I'll build a case that'll hold up." She paused. "And I'll do it quietly. If Raymond is stealing, we don't want him to know we're onto him until we're ready." Gideon turned back from the window. In the lamplight, he looked older than he had that morning. Tired, but also something else. Something like hope. "You've been here 8 hours, and you've already found more problems than I knew I had." "I haven't solved anything yet." "No, but you see them. That's more than I've had in 6 years. He moved toward the door, then stopped. "Miss Zhao? Thank you. Thank me at the end of the week, if I'm still here." The next morning came too soon and hit too hard. Maylene had maybe slept 3 hours, and those had been restless, full of numbers that didn't add up, and voices whispering that she didn't belong. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of men shouting in the yard below. She dressed quickly, the same faded blue dress because it was one of only 2 she owned, and went downstairs. The dining room was empty except for Sarah, who was clearing breakfast plates. "You missed the meal," Sarah said. "Not unkind, just factual. I can fix you something if you'd like. Coffee would be enough. Coffee and toast. You need to eat." Sarah disappeared into the kitchen before Maylene could argue. When she came back, she set down a plate with toast, eggs, and bacon. "You were up late. Gideon said you were working on the books." "Word travels fast. There's 30 men on this ranch and exactly 2 women. Everything travels fast." Sarah sat down across from her. She was maybe 40, with the kind of capable hands that had done every job there was and wouldn't back down from one more. "They're talking about you in the bunkhouse." "I'm sure they are." "Not all bad. Some of them are curious. Cole thinks you might actually know what you're doing. Marcus said anyone who can shut Dutch up for 5 minutes deserves respect." Sarah's smile was small but genuine. "Preacher said you've got balls, which I think was meant as a compliment." "I'll take it." Maylene bit into the toast. It was good, better than she'd expected. What do you think? I think Gideon needs help, and he's too proud to admit how bad things are. I think this ranch has been dying for years, and everyone just pretends not to notice. And I think you showing up might be the best thing that's happened here in a long time. Sarah stood up. Or the worst. We'll see. After breakfast, Maylene went back to the office. The mess looked less overwhelming in daylight, but only slightly. She spent the morning building a system, organizing ledgers chronologically, creating separate piles for different vendors, flagging anything that looked suspicious. By noon, she had a clearer picture of just how deep the problems ran. Dutch found her around 1 o'clock. He knocked on the door frame even though the door was open. Boss said you might need to see the supply shed. I do. I need to verify inventory against the invoices. Figured. He jerked his head toward the yard. Come on. They walked in silence across the compound. Men were working everywhere, fixing fences, training horses, hauling equipment. Every single one of them stopped to stare as Maylene passed. She kept her eyes forward and her spine straight. The supply shed was bigger than it looked from outside, packed with everything from nails to saddles to sacks of grain. Dutch pulled out a clipboard with a handwritten inventory list. Raymond updates this every month, he said. Supposed to match what we got versus what we bought. Maylene took the clipboard, compared it to the invoices she'd brought. The numbers were close, too close. These match perfectly. That's good, right? No, that's impossible. She walked down the aisle counting sacks of grain, 20 on the list, 18 in reality. She checked the nails, the leather, the wire. Every single item was short by at least 10%. Someone's been adjusting the inventory to match the invoices, making it look like we got what we paid for when we didn't. Dutch's expression darkened. Raymond, unless you think someone else has been doing it. He's the only one with consistent access. Dutch set the clipboard down harder than necessary. Son of a bitch. I vouched for him when Gideon hired him. Don't blame yourself yet. We still need proof that'll stand up to scrutiny. Maylene pulled out her notebook, started writing down the actual counts. How often does Raymond go into town? Twice a week for supply runs. More if we need something special. And he handles the money for those purchases? Gideon gives him a budget. Raymond comes back with receipts. Receipts that probably match invoices that probably don't match what actually got delivered. Maylene finished her count. I need to go into town, see the suppliers myself, match their records against ours. That's a half-day ride. Then we should leave early tomorrow. Dutch studied her for a long moment. You're not what I expected. As no one ever expects me. That's kind of the point. That evening, Gideon called a meeting with his senior hands, Dutch, Cole, Marcus, Preacher, and 2 others Maylene hadn't met yet. They gathered in the main room, and every one of them looked uncomfortable when they saw her sitting at the table. Miss Zhao has some concerns about our operation, Gideon said. I want you all to hear them. Maylene stood up. Public speaking had never been her strength, but numbers were. She could hide behind numbers. Your ranch is losing approximately $3,000 a year to inflated supply costs and another $2,000 to unfavorable contracts. On top of that, someone has been systematically stealing from you through falsified invoices and inventory manipulation. Based on the records I've reviewed, the total theft over the past 3 years is approximately $5,000. The room exploded. That's horseshit, one of the men she didn't know said. Who the hell is she to come in here and... She's someone who can read a ledger, Gideon cut in, which is more than any of us can say. Let her finish. Maylene continued, laying out the evidence methodically. The invoices that didn't match. The inventory discrepancies. The pattern of theft that pointed to someone with regular access to both the books and the supply shed. You're talking about Raymond, Marcus said. He didn't sound angry. He sounded tired. You're saying he's been stealing from us. I'm saying the evidence points to someone with his access and responsibilities, but I need to verify the supplier records before I can be certain. Then verify them, Preacher said. If Ray's dirty, I want to know. If he's not, she should apologize and get the hell out. Fair enough, Maylene said. After the meeting, Cole caught up with her in the hallway. That was either really brave or really stupid. Probably both. They're going to make your life hell, even if you're right. Especially if you're right. Nobody likes being told their house is on fire. I'm not here to be liked. Yeah, I'm getting that. He hesitated. For what it's worth, I hope you find what you're looking for. This place needs someone who gives a damn. The next morning, Maylene and Dutch left for town before sunrise. The ride was long and mostly silent, which suited Maylene fine. She spent the time rehearsing what she'd say to the suppliers, how she'd ask questions without revealing too much. Red Hollow looked different when you weren't standing on a marriage platform being rejected. Smaller, less threatening. Just another frontier town trying to pretend it was more civilized than it was. Carson Feed and Grain was their first stop. The owner, a heavy-set man named Porter, greeted Dutch like an old friend and Maylene like a curiosity. "This is Miss Zhao," Dutch said. "She's helping Gideon get his books in order." "About time," Porter said. "No offense, Dutch, but that ranch has been a mess for years." "None taken." Dutch gestured to Maylene. "She's got some questions about our account." Maylene pulled out her notebook. "I'm trying to reconcile our invoices with our actual deliveries. Do you keep records of what you sold us?" "Of course. Can't run a business without records." Porter pulled out a massive ledger. "What dates you looking at?" For the next hour, Maylene cross-referenced Porter's records with the invoices Raymond had submitted. The numbers didn't match, not even close. According to Porter, Iron Ridge had been charged fair market rates, but according to the invoices in Gideon's office, they'd been paying 30% more. "Someone's been altering the invoices," Maylene said quietly. Porter's face went red. "If you're suggesting I'm not suggesting anything about you. Your records are clean. It's what happened after the invoices left your hands. That's the problem." They hit 3 more suppliers. Same story every time. The original invoices showed fair prices, the copies in Gideon's office showed inflated costs, and Raymond had been the one handling all the paperwork. On the ride back, Dutch was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I hired him. Told Gideon he was trustworthy. This is on me. It's on Raymond. You didn't force him to steal." "No, but I should have seen it, should have noticed something was off." "You were trusting someone you thought deserved trust. That's not a failure." Maylene shifted in the saddle. "The failure is the system that made it possible. No oversight, no verification, no checks and balances. Raymond saw an opportunity and took it. That's human nature. Your job now is to fix the system so the next person can't do the same thing." Dutch glanced at her. "You talk like someone who's seen this before." "I worked in a laundry where the owner's son was skimming from the till. He got away with it for 2 years before anyone noticed. By then, he'd stolen enough to disappear. We never saw him again." Maylene looked out at the landscape. "People steal when they think they can get away with it. The trick is making sure they can't." When they got back to Iron Ridge, Gideon was waiting in the yard. He read their expressions and his jaw tightened. "Raymond?" "Raymond," Dutch confirmed. "Where is he?" "Supply run. Won't be back until tomorrow." Dutch dismounted. "What do you want to do?" "I want proof I can show the sheriff. Something that'll stick." Maylene climbed down from her horse. Every muscle ached from the ride, but she pushed past it. "I can build that case. Give me tonight." She worked through the evening, assembling everything into a coherent timeline. Original invoices from suppliers showing correct prices. Altered invoices in Gideon's ledgers showing inflated costs. Inventory records showing shortages. Bank deposits that didn't match the amounts Raymond claimed to have spent. By midnight, she had a stack of evidence that told an undeniable story. Gideon looked it over, his expression getting harder with each page. 3 years. He's been doing this for 3 years. At least, might be longer, but the records before that are too messy to prove anything. And I never noticed. You were grieving and busy and trusting someone you thought you could trust. Maylene gathered up the papers. The question now is what you do about it. I turn it over to the sheriff. Let the law handle it. The law's slow, and if Raymond gets wind of this before he's arrested, he'll run. Then we move fast. Gideon stood up. Tomorrow, when he gets back, we confront him. Dutch can be there as witness. We'll give him a choice, make restitution and leave, or face the sheriff. He won't choose restitution. He's stolen too much to pay it back. Then the sheriff it is. The next day felt like waiting for a storm everyone knew was coming. Raymond arrived back at the ranch around noon, wagon loaded with supplies. He was a thin man, mid-30s, with a face that looked honest until you knew what to look for. Maylin watched from the office window as he unloaded, joking with the other hands like he didn't have a care in the world. Gideon waited until Raymond finished, then called him into the office. Dutch was already there, standing near the door. Maylin stayed at the desk, the evidence stacked in front of her. "What's this about, boss?" Raymond looked relaxed, curious, but not worried. "This is about the 3 years you've been stealing from me." Gideon's voice was flat, cold. "Want to explain that?" Raymond's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Calculation, looking for an exit. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Then let me clarify." Maylin pushed the first document across the desk. "This is an invoice from Carson Feed and Grain showing they charged us $20 for grain last month. This is the invoice in our ledger showing we paid $30. You were the one who submitted both. Must be a clerical error. For 3 years? Every single month?" She pushed another stack forward. "These are inventory counts from the supply shed. They're consistently short by 10 to 15%. You're the one who maintains those records." Raymond's jaw tightened. "You're new here. You don't know how things work. Inventory's never exact on a ranch this size." "She knows exactly how things work," Dutch said from the door. "And so do I. We checked the suppliers, Ray. All of them. Your paperwork doesn't match theirs." For a long moment, no one spoke. Raymond looked at Gideon, then at Dutch, then finally at Maylin. His expression had gone from confusion to something colder, something mean. "So you brought in some Chinese whore to do your accounting," he spat the words, "and you're taking her side over mine?" Gideon moved faster than Maylin had ever seen him move. 1 second he was behind the desk, the next he had Raymond by the collar, slamming him against the wall hard enough to rattle the window frames. "You watch your mouth," Gideon said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've got one chance to walk out of here without the sheriff getting involved. You confess, you make restitution, and you're gone by sundown. Or we take this to town and you explain it to a judge." Raymond's face was red. "You can't prove anything. We have supplier records. We have altered invoices. We have inventory discrepancies that only you could have created." Gideon leaned in closer. "And if we dig deeper, I'm betting we'll find even more. So yeah, Ray, we can prove it. I want a lawyer." "Then you'll get one, in a jail cell." Gideon shoved him toward the door. "Dutch, take him to the bunkhouse. Keep him there until I can get the sheriff out here." Raymond jerked away from Dutch's grip, straightening his shirt with shaking hands. But before he left, he looked back at Maylin with pure hatred. "This is your fault," he said. "You came here and poisoned everything. Gideon's too stupid to see it, but everyone else knows. You don't belong here. You never will." "Maybe not," Maylin said quietly. "But at least I'm not a thief." After Raymond was gone, Gideon slumped into his chair like someone had cut his strings. "I should have seen it. Should have known." "You couldn't have. He was careful, and he was good at what he did. He was stealing from me for 3 years, and I was too blind to notice." Gideon rubbed his face. "Some rancher I am." Maylin stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the ranch continued its daily rhythms. Men working, horses running, life moving forward despite the betrayal that had just been uncovered. "You trusted someone," she said. "That's not weakness. That's necessary. You can't run a place this size without trust." She turned back to him. "But now you build systems that don't require it. You create checks and balances. You verify. You document. You make it so the next person who tries this gets caught in a week, not 3 years. And who's going to build those systems?" Maylin looked at him. Really looked at him. At the man who'd shown up at her door when she had nothing left. Who'd seen something in her that 7 platforms worth of ranchers had missed. Who'd given her a chance when no one else would. "I could," she said, "if you want me to." Something changed in Gideon's expression. Not quite relief, but close to it. "The week's not over yet. You still have time to leave." "I know." But you're not going to, are you? No, Maylene said. I don't think I am. The sheriff came 3 days later, a lean man named Harrow, who looked like he'd seen every kind of human ugliness and wasn't surprised by any of it anymore. He listened to Gideon's explanation, reviewed Maylene's documentation, and arrested Raymond without ceremony. The whole thing took maybe an hour, but the aftermath stretched for weeks. Word spread fast. A Chinese woman had exposed a thief at Iron Ridge Ranch. Depending on who was telling the story, Maylene was either a hero or a troublemaker who'd wormed her way into Gideon's confidence to cause problems. The ranch hands were split down the middle, and the tension in the bunkhouse was thick enough to choke on. Maylene kept her head down and focused on the work. She reorganized the entire bookkeeping system, created inventory controls, established vendor verification procedures. Every morning she was up before dawn, and every night she worked past midnight. If the men wanted to hate her, fine. They could hate her while she saved their jobs. It was Sarah who finally cornered her about it. "You're going to work yourself to death," Sarah said, setting down a cup of coffee Maylene hadn't asked for but desperately needed. "And for what? To prove something to a bunch of cowboys who wouldn't recognize good work if it bit them? I'm proving it to myself. You've already done that. You caught a thief. You fixed the books. You've been here 2 weeks, and you've done more than most of these men do in a year." Sarah sat down across from her. "So why are you still trying so hard?" Maylene looked up from the ledger she'd been updating. "Because the second I stop, they'll say I only caught Raymond because I got lucky, or because Gideon told me what to look for, or because I was sleeping with him." She rubbed her eyes. "I have to be 10 times better than good enough. You know that." "I do. Doesn't mean I like it." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth, Gideon sees what you're doing. He just doesn't know how to say it. He doesn't have to say anything. He gave me a chance when no one else would. That's enough." But it wasn't enough, and both of them knew it. Because 3 weeks after Raymond's arrest, a man named Victor Callaway rode onto the ranch like he owned it, and everything got exponentially worse. Maylene was in the supply shed doing a recount when she heard the commotion. Raised voices, horses, the kind of energy that meant either good news or very bad news. She walked out to find a group of well-dressed men in the yard, and Gideon looking like someone had just punched him in the stomach. The man at the center was in his 50s, silver-haired and broad-shouldered, wearing clothes that cost more than Maylene made in a year when she was still doing laundry work. He had the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, and a handshake that probably crushed bones if he wanted it to. "Gideon," the man said warmly, like they were old friends. "Been too long." "Callaway." Gideon's voice was flat. "What brings you out here?" "Can a neighbor stop by for a visit?" Victor Callaway's smile widened. "Though I suppose we should talk business, too. I've been hearing some interesting things about Iron Ridge lately." "What kind of things?" "That you've had some management issues. Employee theft, wasn't it? Terrible business. Makes a man wonder what else might be slipping through the cracks." Callaway's gaze drifted across the ranch, assessing, calculating. "I also heard you brought in outside help to fix your problems. Very progressive of you." His eyes landed on Maylene and stopped. Not with surprise, but with recognition, like he'd known exactly who she was before he ever rode onto the property. "Miss Zhao, I presume." Callaway tipped his hat. "Victor Callaway. I own the Callaway Cattle Company. We're your largest competitor in the territory." "Competitor implies we're in the same business," Gideon said. "You're a land baron who squeezes out small ranches. We're not the same." "Semantics. The market doesn't care about our philosophical differences." Callaway turned back to Gideon. "I'm here to make you an offer, a generous one. I'll take Iron Ridge off your hands for fair market value. You can walk away with enough money to start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere. Easier." "Not interested." "Don't be hasty. I know you're struggling. Everyone knows. And now with your supply chain in chaos, your workforce questioning your leadership, and your bookkeeper, forgive me, your female foreign bookkeeper, trying to hold things together with arithmetic and stubbornness." Callaway shrugged. "It's only a matter of time before it all falls apart. I'm offering you a dignified exit." Maylene saw Gideon's hands curl into fists. Dutch had appeared from the barn, and his expression suggested he was one word away from violence. "The answer's no," Gideon said. It'll always be no. This is my land and you're not getting it. Callaway's smile didn't waver. We'll see. I find that circumstances have a way of changing people's minds. He remounted his horse. Think about it, Gideon. Think about what's best for everyone, including your new employee. He rode off with his men, leaving a wake of tension so thick it was hard to breathe through. Who the hell was that really? Maylene asked. Trouble, Dutch said. The worst kind. Gideon was already walking toward the house. Meeting. Main room. Now. 10 minutes later, the senior hands were assembled. Gideon paced in front of the fireplace like a caged animal, and Maylene stood near the window, trying to read the room. Callaway wants my land, Gideon said without preamble. He's been circling for years, waiting for me to fail. Now he thinks he's got his opening. He mentioned Raymond? Marcus asked. Didn't have to. He already knew, which means someone told him. Gideon stopped pacing. Anyone here been talking to Callaway's people? Silence. Then Cole said, Boss, half the territory knows about Raymond. Could have been anyone. Could have been, but the timing's suspicious. Gideon looked at each of them in turn. I need to know if anyone here is on Callaway's payroll. If you are, leave now, no questions asked. But if I find out later, there won't be any mercy. More silence. Nobody moved. All right then. Here's the situation. Callaway controls most of the cattle buyers in the region. If he decides to shut us out, we're finished. We need contracts. Multiple contracts. Soon. Good luck with that, Kimo, Preacher said. Callaway's got everyone locked down. Then we go further. San Francisco, maybe. Denver. Gideon glanced at Maylene. You know anyone in San Francisco? Not in the cattle business, but I know people who know people. Maylene's mind was already working through possibilities. If we can get FaceTime with buyers, I can make the pitch. I ran numbers for businesses there. I know how they think. You'd have to go in person. Telegraph won't cut it for this. So we go in person. Dutch shook his head. That's a week's travel each way. 2 weeks minimum. Who's running the ranch while you're gone? You are, Gideon said. You've been my foreman for 15 years. You can handle 2 weeks. And if Callaway makes a move while you're gone, then you handle that too. Gideon's tone left no room for argument. This ranch is dying, Dutch. We all know it. We can sit here and let it die slow, or we can take a risk and fight for it. I'm choosing to fight. The meeting broke up after that, but the unease lingered. Maylene was heading back to the office when Cole caught up with her. You really think you can get contracts in San Francisco? I think I can try. That's not the same as succeeding. No, but it's better than giving up. She looked at him. Why do you care? Cole shrugged. I've worked 5 different ranches. This is the only one where the boss gives a damn about his people. If Callaway takes over, half of us will be gone within a month. He runs his operations like a factory. Profit over everything. So you've got skin in the game. We all do. Even the ones who won't admit it. He hesitated. You're good at what you do, Miss Zhao. Better than good. But going to San Francisco with Gideon, just the 2 of you. People are going to talk. They're already talking. Let them. I'm just saying, it might make things harder when you get back. Things are already hard. At least this way I'll be doing something useful. But 3 days before they were supposed to leave for San Francisco, everything went sideways. It started with a knock on the door at 4 in the morning. Maylene woke to shouting and ran downstairs in her nightgown to find Dutch in the entryway, soaking wet and covered in mud. We've got a problem, he said. What happened? Gideon was already there, pulling on his boots. Someone cut the fence on the north pasture. 30 head of cattle got out. We've been chasing them for 3 hours, but we're still missing about a dozen. Dutch's jaw was tight. And there's something else. We found tracks. Multiple horses. Deliberate cuts on the wire. This wasn't an accident. Callaway. Can't prove it, but yeah, probably. Gideon grabbed his coat. Get everyone up. We need those cattle back before they scatter any further. Maylene started to retreat upstairs, but Gideon stopped her. Can you ride? I can sit on a horse without falling off. That's about it. Good enough. We need every hand we can get. By the time the sun came up, Maylene had been in the saddle for 2 hours and understood why cowboys walked the way they did. Every muscle in her body hurt, and her hands were raw from gripping the reins, but she'd helped round up 4 of the missing cattle, and that was something. They found the last of the strays by mid-morning, but the damage was done. The cattle were stressed, scattered, and 2 of them were injured badly enough that they'd have to be put down. Weeks of careful management wasted. "This is just the start," Dutch said as they rode back. "Callaway's testing us, seeing how we respond." "And how should we respond?" Maylene asked. "We don't, not yet. We document everything, we shore up our defenses, and we don't give him an excuse to escalate." But Callaway didn't need an excuse. 2 days later, one of the ranch hands, a quiet kid named Thomas, came running into the yard like the devil was chasing him. "It's my brother," he said, gasping for air. "They arrested him, in town. They're saying he stole something from Callaway's store." Gideon looked up from the fence post he'd been repairing. "Your brother doesn't steal." "I know, but they've got witnesses. They're talking about a trial." "When?" "Tomorrow. Judge Harris is in town for the circuit. They're rushing it through." Maylene felt something cold settle in her stomach. That's not normal. Circuit court doesn't move that fast unless someone's pushing it. "Callaway," Gideon said, "he's going after our people now, making examples." Thomas's face was pale. "They're saying if he's convicted, it's 6 months in jail, maybe more. My ma can't handle the farm alone, and I can't leave the ranch to help her. We'll lose everything." "What did they say he stole?" Maylene asked. "A saddle from Callaway's general store. But he wouldn't. He doesn't even ride. Why would he need a saddle?" "We asi e sota." Because he wouldn't, Maylene thought, which meant this was a setup, a message. Work for Gideon Vance, and your family pays the price. "We need a lawyer," Gideon said. "Can't afford one. Even if we could, there's no one in Red Hollow who'd go against Callaway." Maylene looked at the stack of evidence she'd built for Raymond's case, at the careful documentation, the cross-referenced records, the logical progression of facts that told an undeniable story. She'd done it once. She could do it again. "Then we don't use a lawyer," she said. Everyone turned to look at her. "You defend your brother yourself," Maylene continued, looking at Thomas. "You tell your story. You show the judge it doesn't make sense. You make them see the truth." "I can't do that. I'm not educated. I can barely read." "Then I'll do it." The silence that followed was absolute. "You?" Dutch said finally. "You're going to defend someone in court? Why not? I can read, I can argue, I can present evidence." Maylene looked at Gideon. "Unless you've got a better idea." "You're not a lawyer, you're not even—" Dutch stopped himself, but everyone knew what he'd been about to say. "You're not even American." "No, I'm not a lawyer, but Thomas's brother doesn't have a lawyer, and he's going to lose if someone doesn't stand up for him. So unless one of you wants to volunteer, I'm the best option he's got." Thomas looked like he was drowning, and someone had just thrown him a rope made of cobwebs. "You do that? For someone you don't even know?" "I know Callaway's trying to hurt this ranch by hurting your family, and I know I'm tired of watching powerful men destroy people because they can." Maylene stood up. "Where's the courthouse?" "Red Hollow, Main Street. Then we leave in 2 hours. I need to review everything you know about your brother. Every detail, every witness, every fact. And I need to see the arrest warrant and any evidence they claim to have." Gideon was staring at her like he'd never seen her before. "You're serious about this?" "Completely. You know this could backfire. If you lose, it makes all of us look weak, makes you look like you were in over your head." "I've been in over my head since I arrived. Might as well drown doing something that matters." The courtroom in Red Hollow was smaller than Maylene expected, just a single room above the general store with benches for maybe 30 people. By the time the trial started, every seat was full and people were standing in the back. Word had spread that the Chinese woman from Iron Ridge was going to defend a thief, and everyone wanted to watch her fail. Thomas's brother, his name was Daniel, sat at the defendant's table looking terrified. He was 19, thin as a rail, with hands that shook when he tried to hold a pen. Maylene sat next to him, wearing her nicest dress and trying to look like she belonged there. Across the aisle, Callaway's lawyer was a man named Hastings, slick and confident in an expensive suit. He had the look of someone who'd never lost a case and didn't plan to start today. Judge Harris entered and everyone stood. He was older, maybe 60, with white hair and eyes that had seen 1,000 cases just like this one. He looked at Maylene with open curiosity. Ms. Zhao, I understand you're representing the defendant? Yes, Your Honor. Are you a licensed attorney? No, Your Honor. But the defendant has the right to representation, and I'm the representation he's chosen. Harris considered that. Very well, though I'll warn you, this court has standards. Emotional appeals won't substitute for legal argument. Understood, Your Honor. The trial began with Hastings presenting his case. It was simple and damning. Daniel Williams had been seen entering Callaway's store. 30 minutes later, an expensive saddle was missing. A witness, the store clerk, had seen Daniel near the saddle display. Another witness, a customer, had seen Daniel leaving the store with something bulky under his coat. The saddle was found 2 days later in a ditch near the Williams farm. Case closed. Hastings presented each piece of evidence with theatrical precision, making it sound like the most obvious crime in history. By the time he finished, the courtroom was buzzing. The jury, 12 local men, looked at Daniel like he'd already confessed. Then it was Maylene's turn. She stood up slowly, smoothing her dress, buying herself a moment to organize her thoughts. Every eye in the room was on her. She could feel their judgment, their skepticism, their certainty that she was about to embarrass herself. Your Honor, may I approach the witness? Harris nodded. Maylene walked to where the store clerk sat. He was a young man, maybe 25, with the kind of face that tried too hard to look trustworthy. You testified that you saw Daniel Williams near the saddle display. What time was this? Around 2 o'clock. And the store was busy? Fair amount of people, yes, ma'am. How many customers would you say were in the store? The clerk shifted. Maybe 10, 15? So quite busy, and you were working the counter? Yes, ma'am. Which is on the opposite side of the store from the saddle display. Well, yes, but I could still see from 30 feet away while helping other customers. You specifically noticed Daniel Williams among 10 to 15 other people, and you remembered exactly where he was standing? The clerk's confidence wavered. I noticed things, part of the job. I see. And did you notice anyone else near the saddle display that day? I don't recall. You don't recall, but you specifically recall Daniel Williams. Objection, Hastings said, badgering the witness. Overruled, Judge Harris said. The witness may answer. The clerk's face was red now. He stood out all right. He looked suspicious. Suspicious how? Just the way he was dressed, the way he moved, nervous-like. Maylene let that hang in the air for a moment. Did you speak to him? No. Did you ask him if he needed help? No. Did you see him touch the saddle? No, but did you see him take the saddle? No, but when I checked later, later? How much later? After he left. Maybe an hour. So you didn't actually see him take anything. You just noticed the saddle was gone an hour after he left, and you assumed he must have taken it. I didn't assume. I knew. Because he looked suspicious. The clerk didn't answer. Maylene turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to call the second witness, the customer who allegedly saw Daniel leaving with something under his coat. The customer was an older woman, well-dressed, clearly uncomfortable being there. She testified that she'd seen a young man, she thought it was Daniel, leaving the store with something concealed under his coat. Did you see his face? Maylene asked. Not clearly. Then how do you know it was Daniel Williams? The clerk pointed him out later, said that was the thief. So you didn't identify him. The clerk told you who to identify. Well, yes, but... And this bulky object under his coat. Did you see what it was? No, but it was shaped like it could have been a saddle. Could have been. Or it could have been a blanket, or a bundle of clothes, or nothing at all. Maylene walked back to the defendant's table. The truth is, you don't know what you saw. You know what you were told you saw. She turned to address the whole courtroom. This entire case rests on two witnesses who didn't actually witness anything. A clerk who noticed a suspicious young man from across a crowded store, but can't tell you what made him suspicious beyond the way he looked. And a customer who saw someone leaving with something that might have been a saddle, but only identified that someone after being told who to identify. The saddle was found near the Williams farm, Hastings interjected. How do you explain that? I can't, but neither can you. Finding stolen property near someone's home doesn't prove they stole it. It proves someone put it there. Maylene looked at Daniel. My client doesn't own a horse. He works as a farmhand. He has no use for a saddle. Why would he risk jail to steal something he has no need for? Objection, speculation. Sustained. Stick to the facts, Miss Zhao. The facts are these, Your Honor. Daniel Williams entered a store. So did a dozen other people. A saddle went missing at some point during a busy afternoon. No one saw who took it. The only thing connecting my client to this crime is the word of two witnesses who admit they didn't actually see him take anything, and the convenient discovery of that saddle near his family's farm. Maylene paused. That's not evidence. That's a story someone wants you to believe. The courtroom was silent now. Even Hastings looked less confident. Your Honor, Maylene continued, I'd like to present an alternate theory. Someone wanted to hurt the Williams family. Someone with the resources and motivation to stage a theft, plant evidence, and ensure the right people were in the right place to witness just enough to make it look convincing. Objection! She's suggesting a conspiracy without evidence. Is there evidence of a saddle being stolen? Maylene asked. Yes. Is there evidence that Daniel Williams stole it? No, just speculation and coincidence. If we're talking about what requires proof, the prosecution should start with actually proving their case. Judge Harris leaned back in his chair, studying Maylene with new interest. Miss Zhao, do you have any evidence to support your theory? I have reasonable doubt, Your Honor, which is all the defense needs. Harris was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to the jury. Gentlemen, you've heard the prosecution's case and the defense's rebuttal. The question before you is simple. Has the prosecution proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Daniel Williams stole that saddle? If you have doubts, any reasonable doubts, you must vote to acquit. The jury deliberated for 20 minutes. When they came back, their foreman stood up. We find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Daniel collapsed in his chair, sobbing. Thomas grabbed Maylene's hand and wouldn't let go. And across the aisle, Hastings was staring at her like she'd just pulled off a magic trick. Outside the courthouse, Callaway was waiting. He stood next to his expensive carriage, that same smile plastered on his face. Impressive performance, Miss Zhao, he said. Truly, you have a gift for making people question what they know to be true. What I have is a gift for recognizing lies. Lies, truth. It's all just words, isn't it? Callaway's smile hardened. But words won't save Iron Ridge. Words won't change the fact that Gideon's ranch is failing, that his people are losing faith, that his time is running out. Maybe, but buying judges and framing innocent people won't change the fact that you're desperate. Maylene met his eyes. You wouldn't be working this hard to destroy us if you didn't see us as a threat. For a moment, Callaway's mask slipped. Beneath the smile was something cold and mean. You're right. I do see you as a threat, which is why I'm going to crush you. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. He climbed into his carriage. Enjoy your little victory. It'll be your last. Swashgitwal. The ride back to Iron Ridge was quiet. Daniel and Thomas had stayed in town to see their mother, and Gideon drove the wagon with Maylene beside him. That was the gutsiest thing I've ever seen, he said finally, and the stupidest. Probably. You made an enemy today, a powerful one. I already had one. At least now he knows I can fight back. Gideon glanced at her. You're not what I expected when I showed up at that boarding house. What did you expect? Someone desperate. Someone who'd be grateful for a chance and wouldn't ask too many questions. He was quiet for a moment. I got someone who won't back down from a fight even when she should. Someone who sees a problem and fixes it instead of waiting for permission. Someone who... He stopped himself. Someone who what? Someone who makes me believe we might actually survive this. When they got back to the ranch, the entire crew was waiting in the yard. Word had already spread about the trial, about Maylene standing up in court and dismantling Callaway's case, about the not guilty verdict. Dutch stepped forward. "Miss Zhao, I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For doubting you. For thinking you were just someone Gideon brought in to make himself feel better. You've proven you belong here, more than some of us who've been here for years." He stuck out his hand. "Welcome to Iron Ridge, for real this time." Maylene shook his hand and the crew erupted in cheers. It wasn't universal. A few men hung back, still skeptical, still waiting for her to fail. But for the first time since she'd arrived, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where rejection wasn't inevitable. That night, she sat in the office going through the books, trying to calculate how much money they'd need to secure those San Francisco contracts. The numbers weren't promising. Even if they got the meetings, they'd need capital to back up their promises. Inventory to show they were serious. Proof that Iron Ridge was a ranch worth betting on. Gideon found her there past midnight. "You should sleep," he said. "Can't. Too much to do." He sat down across from her. "We leave for San Francisco in 3 days. Think we have a shot?" "Honestly, I don't know. But I know we don't have a shot if we don't try." "Fair point." He looked at the papers spread across the desk. "Whatever happens, I want you to know, you've already done more for this place than anyone had a right to expect. You don't owe us anything beyond that. Maybe not, but I owe myself something." "What's that?" Maylene looked at him. At this man who'd seen value in her when 7 platforms worth of men had seen nothing, who'd given her a chance to prove she was more than what people assumed, who'd stood beside her even when it would have been easier to cut her loose. "Proof," she said, "that I was right to keep trying, that rejection number 7 was the one that mattered." Gideon smiled. "Then let's go get you that proof." The journey to San Francisco took 6 days by train, and Maylene spent most of it staring out the window, trying not to think about what would happen if they failed. Gideon sat across from her in their compartment, reviewing the numbers she'd prepared, occasionally asking questions that told her he understood more about business than he let on. "These projections," he said on the 3rd day, tapping the paper. "You're being conservative. I'm being realistic. We can't promise what we can't deliver. But if everything goes right, if we get the contracts, if we streamline operations like you've planned, we could do better than this. We could also do worse. I'd rather underpromise and overdeliver than the other way around." Maylene took the paper back. "These buyers are going to be skeptical. A struggling ranch from Montana, represented by a rancher and his Chinese bookkeeper? They'll be looking for reasons to say no. I'm not giving them ammunition." Gideon was quiet for a moment. "You ever miss it, San Francisco?" "Parts of it, the food, the noise, knowing where I fit, even if where I fit was at the bottom." She looked out the window again. The landscape had changed from prairie to forest to something more civilized. "But I don't miss being invisible. At least at Iron Ridge, people see me. They might not like what they see, but they see me." "I like what I see." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than they should have been. Maylene felt her face heat up and hated herself for it. She was 32 years old, too old to blush like a girl. "That's the exhaustion talking," she said. "No, it's not." Gideon leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've been thinking about the arrangement, the 1-week courtship. That was over a month ago." "I know, and you stayed. You've been running my books, fixing my ranch, defending my people in court. You've done everything I asked and things I didn't know to ask for." He paused. "But we never talked about what comes next." Maylene's throat felt tight. "What do you want to come next?" "I want you to stay, not as an employee, as my partner, my wife." He said it plainly. No poetry, no drama. Just fact. "I know that's not romantic. I know I'm supposed to court you properly, bring you flowers, say pretty things. But the truth is simpler than that. You make me want to fight for this ranch again. You make me believe it's worth saving. That's not love, that's gratitude. Maybe it starts that way. But it doesn't have to stay that way." Gideon's eyes were steady on hers. "I'm not asking you to love me, Maylene. I'm asking if you can see yourself building something with me. Not just a ranch, a life. She wanted to say yes. The word was right there, pushing against her teeth, but fear held it back. Fear that she was making the same mistake she'd made 7 times before, mistaking desperation for opportunity, confusing being needed with being wanted. Ask me again after San Francisco, she said finally. After we know if we can actually save this thing. If we fail, there might not be anything left to build on. And if we succeed, then maybe I'll have an answer you want to hear. San Francisco hit Maylene like a wall of memory. The salt air, the fog rolling off the bay, the cacophony of languages mixing on every corner. They took rooms at a modest hotel near the financial district, separate rooms, because Gideon was nothing if not proper, and spent their first evening planning their approach. They had meetings scheduled with 3 cattle buyers over the next 4 days. Morrison and Sons, the largest operation on the West Coast. Chen Brothers, which handled most of the Chinese restaurant trade. And Pacific Stockyards, a newer company trying to break into the market. If they could secure contracts with even 2 of them, Iron Ridge would survive. All 3, and they'd thrive. But first they needed to convince those buyers that a struggling Montana ranch was worth the risk. The Morrison and Sons office was in a building that probably cost more than Maylene would make in 10 lifetimes. Marble floors, mahogany furniture, men in suits that screamed money and power. The receptionist looked at Gideon's dusty boots and Maylene's simple dress with barely concealed disdain. "Mr. Morrison is very busy," she said. "Are you certain you have an appointment?" 10 o'clock, Gideon said. "Gideon Vance, Iron Ridge Ranch." The receptionist checked her book, frowned, checked again. "I see. Wait here, please." They waited 30 minutes. Maylene knew what was happening. It was a power play, making them cool their heels to establish the hierarchy. She'd seen it in San Francisco business dealings before. The message was clear. Your time is worth less than ours. When they were finally ushered into Morrison's office, the man behind the desk didn't stand up. He was in his 60s, jowly and well-fed, with the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no. "Mr. Vance," Morrison said, "I'll be honest, I almost canceled this meeting. We don't typically work with operations your size." "I appreciate you taking the time anyway." Gideon sat down uninvited and Maylene followed his lead. "We're looking to establish a direct supply relationship. Cut out the middlemen, guarantee quality, competitive pricing." Fascinating. And why would I risk my established supply chain for an unknown quantity from Montana? Morrison's eyes flicked to Maylene. "And you are?" "Maylene Zhao. I handle operations and finance for Iron Ridge." Operations and finance. How modern. His tone suggested it was anything but a compliment. "Tell me, Miss Zhao, what makes you think you can compete with established suppliers who've been in this business for decades?" This was the moment. Maylene pulled out her portfolio, pages of calculations, projections, cost analyses she'd spent weeks preparing, because they're overcharging you by approximately 18% and delivering inconsistent quality. "I've reviewed the market rates for cattle in Montana versus what you're paying through your current distributors. The markup is substantial, and most of it goes to intermediaries who add no value." Morrison's eyebrows rose. "You've researched our costs?" "I've researched the market. Your costs are public record if you know where to look." She slid the papers across his desk. "We can deliver the same quality cattle at 15% below your current costs. Guaranteed weight, guaranteed health inspections, direct delivery to your processing facilities. Guarantees are easy to make, harder to keep. Which is why we're proposing a trial contract. 3 months, limited volume. If we don't meet every specification, you walk away with no penalty. If we do meet them, we negotiate a longer-term arrangement." Maylene leaned forward. "You risk nothing. We risk everything. That's how confident we are." Morrison actually picked up the papers and started reading. The room was silent except for the ticking of an ornate clock on the mantel. Maylene could feel her heart hammering but kept her expression neutral. "Your numbers are compelling," Morrison said finally. "But I have concerns about reliability. Montana's a long way from San Francisco. Weather delays, shipping complications, labor disputes. How do I know you can deliver consistently?" "Because we've been doing it for 15 years. Gideon said. We've weathered droughts, hard winters, market crashes. We're still here, still running cattle. The only thing that's changed is we're cutting out the leeches who've been bleeding both of us dry. And if I'm one of those leeches you're cutting out, you're not. You're a buyer. The leeches are the ones in the middle who convinced you that you needed them. Gideon's voice was steady. Work with us directly, and we both make more money. It's not complicated. Morrison set down the papers. I'll think about it. Leave these projections. I'll have my people review them and get back to you within the week. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. They left the office with something that felt dangerously close to hope. The meeting with Chen brothers went differently. The office was in Chinatown, above a restaurant that smelled like home. The Chen brothers, there were actually 4 of them, greeted Mei Lin in Cantonese and seemed genuinely pleased to see another Chinese face in their business meeting. Your Cantonese is rusty, the eldest brother said, smiling. Been away too long. 3 years. It comes back when I need it. Mei Lin switched to English out of courtesy to Gideon. We're here to discuss a supply arrangement for your restaurant clients. The negotiation was less formal, but no less intense. The Chen brothers knew their business inside and out, and they asked questions that cut straight to the heart of operations. Could Iron Ridge guarantee halal slaughter for their Muslim restaurant clients? What about kosher certification? How quickly could they adjust volumes based on seasonal demand? Mei Lin answered each question with specifics, with numbers, with contingency plans she'd developed during those long nights in Gideon's office. She could see Gideon watching her, seeing a side of her he maybe hadn't fully understood before. This was her element. Not ranching, not cattle, but the dance of negotiation and the precision of well-presented facts. We can work with you, the second brother said finally, but our margins are thin. We need the best possible price. We can meet your price requirements, Mei Lin said. But we need volume guarantees. We can't afford to scale up production if you're going to drop us the moment someone offers you a penny less per head. Fair, we want a 1-year contract, monthly deliveries, price locked in with a renegotiation clause at 6 months to account for market fluctuations. They haggled over details for another hour, but by the time they left, they had a handshake agreement pending written contracts. 1 down, 2 to go. Pacific Stockyards was their last hope for a third contract, but the meeting went sideways from the start. The owner, a man named Jeffries, was young and aggressive, the kind of businessman who saw every interaction as a chance to prove he was the smartest person in the room. Montana beef, he said, like it was a joke. Why would I buy from Montana when I can get better quality from California ranches? Because California ranches are overextended and under-delivering, Mei Lin said. They promise more than they can provide, and you end up with shortfalls and quality issues. We're offering consistency. Consistency. Everyone promises consistency. Jeffries leaned back in his chair. Tell me something I haven't heard before. Mei Lin felt her patience fraying. They'd been at this for 3 days, smiling at men who looked at her like she was part of the furniture, answering the same questions, making the same pitches. She was tired, frustrated, and done pretending to be grateful for scraps. You want something you haven't heard? She stood up. Fine. Your business is failing. You're leveraged up to your neck trying to compete with Morrison, but you're losing market share because you can't match his volume or his prices. You need a supplier who can give you an edge, something that differentiates you. We're that edge. We can deliver quality cattle at prices that let you undercut Morrison by just enough to steal his customers without destroying your margins. But you're too busy trying to prove you're a big shot to see the opportunity sitting in front of you. The room went dead silent. Gideon looked like he was trying to decide whether to back her up or drag her out before she torched their last chance. Jeffrey stared at her. Then, slowly, he started to laugh. You've got guts, I'll give you that. He sat forward. All right, you've got my attention. Show me these numbers that are supposedly going to save my business. They spent the next 2 hours going through everything: costs, logistics, quality controls, delivery schedules. Jeffries was sharp, sharper than Morrison, and he caught details the others had missed. But he also saw the potential. By the end of the meeting, he was nodding. I'll do a trial run. 3 months, like you proposed. But I want weekly deliveries, not monthly. And I want first option on expanding the contract if the trial goes well. Done? Gideon said before Maylene could negotiate further. We'll draw up the contracts and have them to you by tomorrow. They left the office in a daze. 3 meetings. 3 potential contracts. It was more than they dared to hope for. We did it, Gideon said once they were back on the street. The fog was rolling in, turning the city soft and gray. We actually did it. We got possibilities, not certainties. They could still back out. They won't, not after what you showed them. He stopped walking, turned to face her. That thing you said to Jeffries about his business failing, how did you know? I didn't, not for certain, but I know desperation when I see it. He had the same look I used to see in the mirror. Maylene started walking again. People who are succeeding don't need to prove it. They just are. Jeffries was trying too hard. That meant he was scared, and scared people make deals if you give them a way out. They had dinner that night at a small restaurant in Chinatown, one of the places Maylene used to walk past when she lived here, too poor to afford more than rice and vegetables. Now she sat across from Gideon eating roast duck and trying to process the fact that they might have actually pulled this off. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, she said, for someone to realize they made a mistake and cancel everything. That's because you've been conditioned to expect rejection. But this time, you're not standing on a platform waiting to be chosen. You're sitting across a negotiating table telling people what they're going to do. Big difference. Is it, though? Either way, I'm still hoping someone sees value in what I'm offering. No. When you were on those platforms, you were trying to be what they wanted. Today, you were exactly who you are, and you made them adjust to you. That's not the same thing at all. Gideon poured them both tea. You know what I realized watching you work today? What? I didn't choose you because I was desperate. I was desperate, but that's not why I chose you. Sorry. He set down the teapot. I chose you because somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that anyone who could stand on 7 platforms and keep their dignity intact was someone worth betting on. I just didn't know how right I was. Maylene felt something crack open in her chest, something she'd been keeping locked down for weeks, maybe months, maybe years. You're making this very hard for me to keep my distance. Good. I don't want you at a distance. I want you right here, building this thing with me. He reached across the table, and after a moment's hesitation, she took his hand. So I'm asking again. Will you marry me? You said to ask after San Francisco. This is after San Francisco. We got the contracts. The ranch is going to survive. What's your answer? Maylene looked at their joined hands. His were calloused and scarred from decades of ranch work. Hers were stained with ink and marked with paper cuts from long nights with ledgers. They didn't match, didn't fit together in any aesthetic sense. But they worked. They got things done. Ask me properly, she said. Gideon blinked. What? You said you weren't romantic, that you couldn't do poetry and flowers. But I've been rejected 7 times by men who didn't think I was worth the effort. If I'm going to say yes to number 8, I want to know you think I'm worth it too. For a moment she thought she'd pushed too far. Then Gideon stood up, walked around the table, and got down on one knee right there in the restaurant. The other diners stopped eating, staring at the rancher proposing to the Chinese woman like it was a stage show. Maylene Zhao, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You're the smartest person I've ever met. You're stubborn as hell. You don't take no for an answer. And you've saved my ranch more times than I can count. I can't promise you an easy life. I can't promise you that my people won't give you grief or that every day won't be a fight. But I can promise you partnership, respect, and a man who sees exactly who you are and wants exactly that. Will you marry me? The restaurant had gone completely silent. Maylene looked at Gideon, really looked at him, at the man who'd shown up at a boarding house when she had nothing left, who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd stood beside her through theft and trials and business meetings where half the room thought she shouldn't be there. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. The restaurant erupted in applause. Gideon kissed her right there, in front of everyone, and Maylene kissed him back. It wasn't her first kiss. She wasn't that innocent, but it was the first one that felt like the beginning of something instead of the end. They spent the next 2 days getting the contracts finalized and signed. Morrison's people came back with approval faster than expected, clearly motivated by the fact that Chen Brothers and Pacific Stockyards had already committed. By the time Maylene and Gideon boarded the train back to Montana, they had 3 signed contracts worth enough to not only save Iron Ridge, but expand it. The journey back felt different, lighter. Gideon sat beside her instead of across from her, and they spent the miles planning where they'd build the new cattle pens, how they'd hire additional hands, what systems Maylene would implement to make sure they could actually deliver on the promises they'd made. It was practical and unglamorous, and Maylene loved every minute of it. "We should get married before the first delivery," Gideon said on the 4th day. "Make it official. Give the crew something to celebrate." "Are you sure they'll celebrate?" "Half of them still aren't convinced I belong there." "They'll celebrate because I'm telling them to, and because you just saved their jobs. Even the stubborn ones can do that math." He pulled her closer. "Besides, I want everyone to know you're not going anywhere, that you're mine and I'm yours, and anyone who has a problem with that can work somewhere else." "How romantic." "I'm trying. I know, that's why it works." But when they arrived at Iron Ridge 5 days later, the celebration Gideon had imagined was the furthest thing from anyone's mind. Dutch met them at the station, and his expression told them everything before he said a word. "We've got problems," he said. "Big ones." "What happened?" Gideon was already climbing down from the train, helping Maylene after him. "Callaway happened. He showed up 3 days ago with lawyers and surveyors, claims there's a boundary dispute, says part of our north pasture is actually on his land, and he's filing with the territory court to get it back." "That's horseshit. Those boundaries have been settled for 20 years. "I know. But he's got documents, surveys, claims there was an error in the original land grant, and he's correcting it." Dutch's jaw was tight. "If he wins, we lose about 1,000 acres, including the water rights." Maylene felt her stomach drop. "Water rights?" "The creek that feeds our operation runs through that section. Without it, we can't support the herd size we just promised to those contracts." Dutch looked at them both. "He knows about San Francisco. Don't ask me how, but he knows. And he's making his move." The ride back to the ranch was tense and silent. Maylene's mind was racing through possibilities, consequences, worst-case scenarios. They just committed to delivering specific volumes of cattle on specific schedules. If they couldn't access that water, they couldn't sustain the herd. If they couldn't sustain the herd, they'd breach the contracts. If they breached the contracts, they'd lose everything. And Callaway knew it. When they reached Iron Ridge, the crew was waiting. They looked worried, angry, and more than a little scared. Gideon addressed them from the porch, Maylene at his side. "I know you've heard about Callaway's claim," he said. "I know you're worried, but here's what I want you to understand. We just secured 3 major contracts in San Francisco, contracts that will keep this ranch running for years. Callaway is trying to destroy that before it even starts. He thinks if he hits us hard enough, fast enough, we'll fold. But he's wrong." "How do we fight him?" Cole asked. "He's got lawyers and money and judges in his pocket." "We fight him with the truth, and with someone who's really good at finding it." Gideon looked at Maylene. "Tell them." Maylene stepped forward. Her hands were shaking, but she kept her voice steady. "Callaway's claim relies on a boundary error that supposedly happened 20 years ago. That means there are records, original surveys, land grants, correspondence. If the error exists, it'll be in those documents. If it doesn't exist, the absence will prove it. Either way, we find the truth. And if the truth is on his side," this from Marcus, "then we adapt. We find another water source, we adjust our operations, we renegotiate our contracts if we have to. But I don't think the truth is on his side. I think he's betting we won't fight back, that we'll be too tired, too scared, too poor to challenge him." Maylene looked at each of them. "He's wrong about that too." That night, while Gideon met with Dutch to plan their legal strategy, Maylene sat in the office surrounded by maps and land records. Sarah brought her coffee and food she didn't eat, and the lamp burned until dawn. She found it at 4 in the morning, buried in a file of correspondence from 1862. A letter from the territorial surveyor to the original owner of what was now Callaway's ranch, explicitly stating that the creek and surrounding land belonged to the adjacent property, which eventually became Iron Ridge. The boundary wasn't an error. It was exactly where it had always been. Callaway hadn't made a mistake. He'd made a gamble. He was betting that the original documentation had been lost or destroyed in the 20 years since the survey. He was betting no one would have the resources or the determination to prove him wrong. He'd bet against Mei-Lin Zhao, and he was about to lose. When Gideon came down at sunrise, she had everything laid out on the desk. The original survey, the surveyor's letter, subsequent correspondence confirming the boundaries, a complete paper trail that destroyed Callaway's claim before it even reached a courtroom. "How did you find this?" Gideon stared at the documents like they were holy relics. "I didn't sleep, and I knew what to look for." Mei-Lin rubbed her eyes. "We need to file a counterclaim, today, before he can build momentum. I'll ride into town, get this to our lawyer. No, we deliver it to the territorial court ourselves. On record, with witnesses." Mei-Lin stood up. "And then we make sure everyone knows that Victor Callaway tried to steal land based on forged documents, and we caught him. You want to go public with this? I want him to understand that we're not backing down, that every time he comes at us, we're going to hit back twice as hard." She gathered up the papers. "He thinks we're weak. He thinks he can bully us into submission. Let's show him exactly how wrong he is." They filed the counterclaim that afternoon with half the ranch crew as witnesses. The clerk's face when she saw the documentation was worth the sleepless night. Within hours, word had spread through Red Hollow that Callaway's land grab had been exposed as a fraud. By evening, Callaway himself showed up at Iron Ridge. But this time he didn't come with smiles and veiled threats. He came alone, and he came angry. "You're making a mistake," he said from his horse, looking down at Gideon and Mei-Lin in the yard. "You embarrassed me today. That's not something I forget." "You embarrassed yourself," Mei-Lin said. "We just provided the evidence. You think you've won. You think your little contracts and your clever paperwork make you safe. But I've been breaking ranches in this territory for 20 years. You're not special. You're not different. You're just next." He turned his horse. "Enjoy your victory, Miss Zhao. I promise you it's temporary." As Callaway rode off, Dutch appeared at Mei-Lin's shoulder. "He's not going to let this go." "I know. Whatever he does next, it's going to be worse. I know that too." Mei-Lin watched until Callaway disappeared over the hill. "But we're not the same people we were when he first showed up. We're stronger now. We're organized. We've got contracts and proof, and people who believe in what we're building. Let him come. We'll be ready." That night, Gideon found her on the porch. She was staring out at the ranch, at the land they'd just fought to keep, thinking about everything that had changed since she'd stood on that 7th platform. "You should be sleeping," he said, sitting beside her. "So should you." "Can't. Too much in my head." He took her hand. "We're getting married next week. Sarah's arranging everything. The whole crew's invited. Half the town, probably. They'll come to see if I actually go through with it. Let them. Let them see you in a wedding dress saying yes to the man who's lucky enough to have you. Let them see that rejection number 7 turned into the best thing that ever happened to both of us." He kissed her hand. "I love you. I should have said it in San Francisco, but I was scared you'd think I was just caught up in the moment. But I wasn't. I'm not. I love you, Mei-Lin, exactly as you are." Mei-Lin turned to face him, and for the first time in weeks, she let herself cry. Not from sadness or frustration or fear, but from relief. From the overwhelming knowledge that she'd finally found what she'd been looking for on all those platforms. Not a man who would take her despite her flaws, but a man who saw her clearly and chose her anyway. "I love you too," she said. "Even though you're terrible at romance and your ranch was a disaster when I found it, and you let your employees steal from you for 3 years. He laughed. "When you put it that way, I'm amazed you stayed. I stayed because you saw me when everyone else looked right through me. I stayed because you gave me a chance to prove what I could do. I stayed because—" She stopped, searching for the right words. "Because for the first time in my life, I found a place where being exactly who I am was enough." They sat there as the sun went down over Iron Ridge, two people who'd found each other in the margins of other people's expectations. The contracts were signed, the land was secure, and the wedding was planned. But both of them knew Callaway's threat was real. Whatever came next, it would test everything they'd built, everything they'd become. The wedding was supposed to happen on Saturday, Callaway made his move on Thursday. Maylin was in the office reviewing the delivery schedules for their first shipment to Morrison when Dutch burst through the door, tracking mud across the floor. She'd just convinced someone to sweep. "We've got a situation," he said, breathing hard. "The cattle. Someone opened the gates on the south pasture during the night. About 200 head scattered. We've been tracking them since dawn, but they're spooked, spreading out into the hills." Maylene stood up so fast her chair tipped over. 200 head. That's half our first delivery. I know. How did this happen? We posted guards after the last incident. Guards were drugged. Found them this morning, barely conscious. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Dutch's expression was grim. And there's more. The grain storage shed caught fire around the same time. We got it out before it spread to the other buildings, but we lost about 60% of our winter feed supply. The numbers cascaded through Maylene's head, each one worse than the last. Lost cattle meant missed delivery quotas. Fire damage meant unexpected expenses. Drugged guards meant Callaway had people inside the ranch, which meant nowhere was safe. "Where's Gideon?" "Out with the search party. Been riding since sunrise." Dutch pulled off his hat, ran a hand through his hair. "Miss Zhao, I've been ranching for 30 years. I've seen droughts, blizzards, market crashes. This is different. This is someone systematically trying to destroy us, and they're doing a damn good job of it. Then we need to be systematic right back." Maylene's mind was already working through the problem, breaking it into pieces she could solve. "Get me a count of exactly how many cattle we've recovered. I need to know our real numbers, not estimates, and I need to know how much feed we actually lost versus how much we need to get through winter." "What are you planning?" "I'm planning to make sure Callaway doesn't win." By the time Gideon returned that evening, exhausted and covered in dust, Maylene had 3 emergency plans mapped out and was working on a 4th. He found her in the office surrounded by papers, her ink-stained fingers flying across a ledger. "We recovered 140, he said without preamble. 60 are still out there. If we don't find them in the next day or 2, we probably won't. Coyotes, weather, they'll scatter too far to track. That puts us 40 head short on the Morrison delivery." Maylene didn't look up from her calculations. "But if we adjust the Chen brothers' delivery forward by 2 weeks and pull from that allocation, we can meet Morrison's numbers and make up the shortfall to Chen next month when the spring calves mature." "That's cutting it close." "Everything's close now. Close is all we've got." She finally looked at him. "The feed situation is worse. We lost enough that we'll have to start supplementing in about 6 weeks instead of 8. That's additional cost we didn't budget for, and it'll eat into our profit margins." Gideon slumped into a chair. "Maybe we should postpone the wedding." "Why?" "Because getting married while the ranch is falling apart seems like bad timing." "The ranch isn't falling apart. It's under attack. Those are different things." Maylene set down her pen. "Postponing the wedding tells Callaway he's winning. It tells our crew that we're scared. It tells our business partners that we're unstable. We're not doing any of those things." "You sound very certain for someone who's been here less than 2 months." "I'm certain because I know what giving up looks like. I've done it 7 times, remember? This isn't that." She walked around the desk and sat beside him. "Callaway thinks if he hits us hard enough, we'll crumble. He thinks we're fragile because we're not established, because we're unconventional, because I'm a woman and I'm Chinese and you're a rancher who dared to choose someone like me. But he's wrong. We're not fragile, we're flexible. There's a difference." Gideon looked at her like he was seeing something he hadn't quite understood before. "How are you not terrified right now?" "I am terrified. My hands have been shaking for 3 hours. But I'm also angry, and angry is more useful than scared." She took his hand. "We're getting married on Saturday. We're delivering our cattle on schedule. We're going to survive this, and then we're going to make sure Callaway regrets ever targeting us." "How?" "I'm still working on that part." The next morning, Maylene rode into Red Hollow alone. Gideon had objected, Dutch had objected, even Sarah had objected, but Maylene had been firm. What she needed to do required her to do it herself, without the weight of Iron Ridge's reputation behind her. She found Callaway at his office, a sprawling building on Main Street that proclaimed his wealth and power. The receptionist tried to turn her away, but Maylene walked past her without breaking stride and opened Callaway's door uninvited. He was sitting behind a massive oak desk, reviewing papers. He looked up with manufactured surprise that didn't reach his eyes. Miss Zhao, to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Drop the act. We both know you drugged my guards and scattered our cattle. Maylene closed the door behind her. I'm here to make you an offer. Callaway leaned back in his chair, amused. You're in no position to make offers. Neither are you. You've been spending a lot of resources trying to destroy us, bribing workers, staging thefts, filing fraudulent legal claims, committing arson. All of that costs money and exposes you to criminal liability if anyone can prove it. Good luck proving anything. I don't need to prove it. I just need to make it expensive for you to keep trying. Maylene sat down uninvited. Here's what I know. You want Iron Ridge's land because it connects two parts of your territory. Without it, you're running a fractured operation that costs you efficiency. With it, you're the dominant rancher in 3 counties. That's worth fighting for. Glad you understand the stakes. But what you don't understand is that I'm not fighting to keep you from getting what you want. I'm fighting to survive. And people fighting for survival are dangerous because they have nothing to lose. She pulled out a folder from her bag. I've been doing research on your operation. Your finances are public record, same as everyone else's. You're over-leveraged. You've got loans coming due in 6 months, and your current revenue won't cover them unless you expand. That's why you need our land now, not later, now. Callaway's expression hardened. Careful, Miss Zhao. I've spent my whole life being careful. It got me nowhere. She opened the folder. Here's my offer. You back off. Completely. Stop the sabotage, withdraw the legal challenges, leave Iron Ridge alone. In exchange, we give you right of first refusal if we ever decide to sell. That's not an offer. That's a fantasy. It's a guarantee that you'll eventually get what you want without destroying both of us in the process. Because right now, you're winning battles but losing the war. Every dollar you spend trying to break us is a dollar you can't spend on your own operation. Every legal challenge you file creates public records of your tactics. Every incident of sabotage creates witnesses who might talk if the price is right. Maylene leaned forward. You think you're being strategic. You're actually being obvious, and obvious is vulnerable. You're bluffing. You don't have the resources to fight me long term. You're right, I don't. But I don't need to fight you long term. I just need to survive until your loans come due and your lenders start asking questions about why you're hemorrhaging cash on a vendetta instead of running your business. She stood up. Think about it. You can have our land eventually, with our cooperation and no public scandal. Or you can keep fighting us, expose yourself to legal liability, and maybe win a Pyrrhic victory that costs you everything else you've built. She walked to the door, then paused. I've been underestimated my whole life, Mr. Callaway. Every single time, the people who underestimated me regretted it. Don't make the same mistake. She left before he could respond. Her hands didn't start shaking until she was 2 blocks away, but she made it back to her horse before anyone could see. That night, the crew gathered for a pre-wedding dinner that felt more like a war council. Sarah had cooked enough food to feed an army, and the dining room was packed with men who'd spent the day chasing scattered cattle and rebuilding burned structures. Gideon stood at the head of the table and raised his glass. I know the last few days have been hell. I know we're all tired, frustrated, and wondering if this fight is worth it, so I want to remind you what we're fighting for. He gestured around the room. Some of you have been with me for 15 years. Some of you for 6 months. Some of you, he looked at Maylene, for 6 weeks. But every single one of you is here because you believe in what this place can be. Not what it is right now, with our fences cut and our cattle scattered. What it can be when we get through this. And if we don't get through it, someone asked from the back, then we fail together, and at least we'll know we didn't go down without a fight. Gideon's voice was steady. But I don't think we're going to fail. I think we're going to survive this. I think we're going to deliver our contracts on time. I think we're going to build something that lasts. And I think 20 years from now, we're going to tell stories about the time Victor Callaway tried to break us and we told him to go to hell. The room erupted in cheers. Maylene felt something tight in her chest loosen just slightly. After dinner, she found Dutch outside checking the new guard rotations. That thing you did today? He said without looking at her, going to see Callaway alone. That was either really brave or really stupid. Why not both? Because if you're both, you're going to get yourself killed. He turned to face her. I know you think you can outthink him, and maybe you can, but men like Callaway don't play by rules. They don't care about logic or fairness or who's right. They care about winning. So do I. Yeah, I'm starting to see that. Dutch was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Even with all the chaos, this place needed someone who wasn't afraid to shake things up. I'm afraid all the time. I just don't let it stop me. That's the same thing as being brave. The wedding took place on Saturday as planned, in the ranch's main yard with the entire crew in attendance and half of Red Hollow watching from wagons parked along the fence line. Sarah had strung up wildflowers and lanterns, and someone had built a makeshift altar out of hay bales and lumber. Maylene wore a dress Sarah had helped her make from fabric they'd bought in town. Simple white cotton with blue embroidery at the collar and sleeves. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers, made with her own hands for a wedding nobody had expected to happen. She walked down the aisle alone because she'd walked alone for most of her life, and it felt dishonest to pretend otherwise now. The crew parted to let her through, and she could see the mix of emotions on their faces. Approval from some, skepticism from others, curiosity from everyone. Gideon stood at the altar in his best clothes, which weren't much better than his work clothes but were clean and pressed. When he saw her, his face did something complicated that made her throat tight. The ceremony was short. The minister, a circuit preacher who came through once a month, kept it simple. Do you take this man? Do you take this woman? I do. I do. You're married now. When Gideon kissed her, the crew cheered loud enough to scatter birds from the barn roof, and for just a moment, Maylin let herself believe that maybe this would actually work, that maybe she'd finally found the place she'd been searching for on all those platforms. The celebration lasted until midnight, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Maylene danced with Gideon, with Dutch, with Cole and Marcus, and even Preacher, who was surprisingly graceful for a man with so many scars. She laughed more than she had in years, and when she finally caught her breath and looked around at the ranch lit up with lanterns and filled with people who'd become something like family, she felt a dangerous surge of hope. That's when the rider came. He appeared at the edge of the lantern light, moving fast. Before Dutch could intercept him, he dismounted and was running toward Gideon. Mr. Vance, there's a problem at the north pasture. Someone's cutting the fences again, and there's fire. Looks like they're trying to start another one. The celebration died instantly. Gideon was already moving, calling for Dutch and the senior hands. Maylene grabbed his arm. This is a distraction, she said. It has to be. He wants us looking north while he does something else. What else is there? Maylene's mind raced through possibilities. Then it hit her. The cattle we recovered, where are they? South pasture, near the... Gideon's eyes widened. The creek. They ran, not north toward the reported fire, but south toward the water source that fed their entire operation. Maylene's wedding dress caught on branches and tore on fence wire, but she didn't slow down. Behind them, she could hear Dutch redirecting the crew. But she and Gideon reached the creek first. 3 men were there in the darkness, working by lamplight. They had shovels and they were digging, not at the creek itself, but upstream, creating a diversion that would reroute the water away from Iron Ridge's land. Gideon didn't hesitate. He tackled the nearest man before the guy even saw him coming. The other 2 tried to run, but Dutch and Cole arrived and cut them off. Within minutes, all 3 were on the ground, hands tied with rope someone had grabbed from the barn. Who sent you? Gideon demanded. The men stayed silent. I'll ask one more time. Who sent you? You know who sent us, one of them finally said. Same person who's been paying us to make your life hell for the last month. And he's going to keep paying people until you give up or go broke. Maylene stepped forward into the lamplight. She was still in her torn wedding dress, covered in dirt and scratches, but she'd never felt more in control. How much is he paying you? She asked. The man blinked. What? How much? I want a number. $20 each. I'll give you $50 each to testify in court about who hired you and what he paid you to do. She looked at all three of them. You can take Callaway's 20 and hope he doesn't turn on you the moment you're not useful anymore. Or you can take my 50 and help us put an end to this. Your choice. The men looked at each other. Then the first one said, 75. Done. But you testify to everything, every job he gave you, every payment, every instruction. And if you lie or leave anything out, the deal's off and you're charged with arson and trespassing. How do we know you'll pay? Because unlike Victor Callaway, when I make a deal, I keep it. Maylene turned to Dutch. Take them to the bunkhouse. Guard them. We're going to town first thing tomorrow to file charges. She walked back to the ranch house without waiting to see if anyone followed. She was done waiting, done being reactive, done letting Callaway control the narrative. By the time she reached the office, she had a plan. Gideon found her an hour later, still in her ruined wedding dress, writing furiously. What are you doing? Writing a statement for the newspaper, detailing every instance of sabotage, theft, and intimidation. Names, dates, amounts, everything those men are going to testify to, plus everything we've documented over the last month. She didn't stop writing. Callaway's been operating in the shadows because he knows exposure is his weakness, so we're exposing him to everyone. That'll make him even more dangerous. He's already as dangerous as he can be. But if we go public, if we make this story bigger than just our ranch, he can't make us disappear without making himself look guilty. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, and I'm about to turn every lamp we have on Victor Callaway. The statement ran in the Red Hollow Gazette 3 days later. By the following week, it had been picked up by papers in 3 counties. The story had everything people loved. A land baron terrorizing a smaller operation, a Chinese woman standing up to power, sabotage and fires, and courtroom drama. Public opinion turned fast and turned hard. Suddenly, Callaway wasn't the respected businessman expanding his empire. He was the bully trying to crush competition. His lenders started asking questions. His business partners started keeping their distance. His reputation, carefully built over decades, started cracking. He showed up at Iron Ridge one final time, 2 weeks after the wedding. This time he came without his men, without his lawyers, without his smile. Maylene met him in the yard. Gideon stood beside her, and behind them, the entire crew had assembled like an army. "You've destroyed me," Callaway said. His voice was flat, empty. 20 years building this business, and you've destroyed it in 2 months. "I didn't destroy anything," Maylene said. "You destroyed yourself the moment you decided that power meant you could hurt people without consequences. All I did was show people what you really are. My lenders are calling in my loans. My partners are terminating contracts. I'll be bankrupt within the year. Then you'll know what it feels like to have everything taken from you. The difference is, I'll have earned my survival. You earned your fall." Callaway looked at her with something that might have been respect or might have been hatred. Probably both. "I underestimated you. Everyone does. That's their mistake, not mine." He left without another word. They never saw him again. 6 months later, they heard his ranch had been sold at auction, parceled out to smaller operations. His empire dismantled. His legacy, a cautionary tale about hubris and overreach. The first delivery to Morrison went off without a problem. So did the second, and the third. Within 6 months, Iron Ridge had expanded from 30 hands to 50. They built new cattle pens, upgraded the bunkhouse, and hired 2 additional bookkeepers to help Maylene manage the growing operation. Sarah took over managing the household, and she and Maylene became something closer than friends, partners in keeping a ranch full of stubborn men from destroying themselves through sheer masculine pride. Dutch never quite warmed to Maylene, but he respected her, which was better. Cole became her unlikely ally, translating between the crew and the office when communications broke down. Marcus taught her to ride properly, and Preacher taught her to curse in 3 languages. A year after the wedding, Maylene stood on the porch of the ranch house watching the sunrise over land that was now legally hers as much as Gideon's. She was 33 years old, married to a man she loved, running an operation that had grown beyond anything she'd imagined when she'd stood on that 7th platform. Gideon came out with 2 cups of coffee and sat beside her. "You're thinking loud," he said. "I'm thinking about how different this is from what I thought I wanted. Better or worse? Different. When I was going from town to town, standing on those platforms, I had this idea in my head of what belonging would look like. A nice house, a kind husband, acceptance. She sipped her coffee. This isn't that. No? The house needs repairs. You're kind, but you're also stubborn as hell and terrible at delegating. And half the territory still whispers about the Chinese woman who married above her station. She smiled. But it's real. It's mine. I built it with my own hands and my own mind. Nobody gave it to me. Nobody chose me out of pity. I earned every inch of it. We earned it together. Yeah, together. She leaned against him. You know what I realized? All those rejections weren't failures. They were redirections. Every man who passed me by was just pointing me toward you, toward this, toward a place where being exactly who I am was exactly what was needed. That's a very optimistic interpretation of 7 humiliations. Maybe. But I think rejection only destroys you if you let it define you. If you let it tell you who you are instead of just showing you where you don't belong. Maylene looked out at the ranch, at the cattle grazing, the men working, the life they'd built from desperation and determination. I didn't belong on those platforms. I belonged here. I just had to be rejected enough times to find my way. 6 months after that conversation, Maylene discovered she was pregnant. The baby came in the spring, a daughter they named Sarah, after the woman who'd been the first to show Maylene kindness. She had Gideon's stubborn chin and Maylene's dark eyes, and from the moment she entered the world, she had the entire ranch wrapped around her tiny fist. The crew built her a cradle from oak wood. Sarah sewed her blankets. Dutch, the man who never smiled, could be found in the nursery at odd hours, rocking the baby and singing off-key lullabies in a language Maylene didn't recognize but suspected was German. Watching her daughter grow up on the ranch, Maylene thought about all the things she wanted to teach her. How to read a ledger, how to negotiate a contract, how to stand up to bullies, and how to build something from nothing. But most of all, she wanted to teach her that rejection was just redirection. That being passed over wasn't the same as being passed by. That sometimes the greatest gift was being overlooked by people who never would have appreciated you anyway. Years later, when young Sarah asked about how her parents met, Maylene told her the truth. About the 7 platforms. About the men who'd looked right through her. About the boarding house and the last dollar and the decision to give up. And then about Gideon, who'd showed up too late for the selection but exactly on time for her. Were you sad? Sarah asked. When all those men said no? At the time, yes. But now? Maylene pulled her daughter close. Now I'm grateful, because if even one of them had said yes, I wouldn't have found my way here. To this ranch. To your father. To you. So rejection was good? Rejection was necessary. It cleared away everything that was wrong so I could find what was right. Maylene smiled. The trick isn't avoiding rejection. It's not letting rejection convince you to stop trying. It's understanding that every no just means you're one step closer to the yes that actually matters. Sarah considered this with the serious expression of a child trying to understand adult wisdom. So if someone rejects me, I should be happy? No, you should let yourself feel sad. That's human. But then you should get up, dust yourself off, and keep going. Because somewhere out there is a person or a place or a purpose that needs exactly who you are. Your job isn't to change yourself to fit what other people want. Your job is to keep being yourself until you find where you fit. It was the same lesson Maylene had learned standing on that 7th platform, watching the last wagon roll away. The same lesson she'd learned building a life from rejection and determination. The same lesson she'd learned the hard way through humiliation and heartbreak and the slow, painful process of understanding her own worth. The world would try to tell Sarah she was too much or not enough, too different or not different enough. People would pass her over, underestimate her, dismiss her potential before she even had a chance to show it. That was inevitable. The only thing Sarah could control was whether she let those rejections define her or refine her. Maylene had chosen refinement. She'd taken every rejection and used it as fuel. Every platform that left her behind had taught her something about resilience. Every man who'd looked through her had shown her what she didn't want. Every humiliation had been a lesson in endurance. And in the end, it had led her here, to a ranch that thrived, to a marriage built on respect and partnership rather than romance and fantasy, to a daughter who would grow up knowing that her mother had been rejected 7 times and had turned that rejection into the foundation of an empire. Standing on the porch of Iron Ridge Ranch 20 years after that 7th platform, Meilin Zhao understood something she wished she could tell her younger self. Something she wished she could tell every woman standing on a platform waiting to be chosen. You don't need someone to choose you, you need to choose yourself. You need to look rejection in the face and say, "Fine, you weren't my person anyway. My person is still out there, and they'll see what you missed." Because in the end, it only took one person to truly see her worth to change everything. Not 7 platforms of men who couldn't recognize value when it stood right in front of them. Just one person willing to look past the surface and see the strength underneath. Gideon had been that person for her. But more importantly, she had become that person for herself. And that made all the difference. The ranch continued to grow, the contracts multiplied, the crew expanded. Iron Ridge became known not just as a successful cattle operation, but as the ranch run by the woman who'd been rejected 7 times and had turned that rejection into something unbreakable. People came from other territories to see how she'd organized the books, how she'd structured the contracts, how she'd built systems that didn't rely on trust, but on verification and accountability. She shared everything freely because she understood that her success didn't diminish by being shared. It multiplied. And sometimes, late at night when the ranch was quiet and Gideon was asleep beside her, Meilin would think about those 7 platforms. About the men who'd passed her by. About the versions of herself that had stood there, hoping to be chosen. She didn't hate those men anymore. Didn't even resent them. They'd done her a favor, really. They'd shown her that waiting to be chosen was a waste of time. That building something yourself was better than being given something by someone who didn't value you properly. Every rejection had been a gift, even if it hadn't felt like one at the time. Every no had been a redirection toward the life she was supposed to build. Every humiliation had been preparation for the strength she'd need to survive and thrive. And that was the truth Meilin wanted the world to understand. Rejection wasn't the end of the story. It was just the part where the real story began. The part where you stopped waiting for permission and started taking action. The part where you stopped asking to be chosen and started choosing yourself. It only took one person to see your worth. But it was even better when that person was you. 25 years after standing on that 7th platform, Meilin Zhao sat on the porch of the largest cattle operation in Montana Territory, surrounded by family and success and a life she'd built with her own hands. She'd been rejected 7 times, and she was grateful for every single one, because rejection number 7 had led her here, to a place where being overlooked had become her greatest strength, to a life where being exactly who she was had been exactly enough. And that was worth more than all the platforms in the world.